Welcome to the Dr. DC podcast. My name is Colin, and next to me is the Doctor himself.
Hello.
And as always, we are joined by producer Richard.
Ahoy, hoy.
Each week, we talk about the weird and wonderful world of DC comics and movies while fielding questions from listeners like you.
Well, on the second day of DocMas, the Doctor gave to me 2 bad impressions and some comic books from DC.
What were the 2 bad impressions?
You're close. Give them to me.
And...
Michael Caine.
Yes.
Oh...
Yes, very good.
That was a good impression. And in news, Legion of Superheroes make their debut in Supergirl trailer.
I think like episodes ago, like before the new seasons of these CW shows started up, we had said that it looks like Supergirl's moving towards like fully introducing the Legion of Superheroes.
I think you did mention that.
They had Mon-El on as a recurring character last season, and then we knew that they had cast someone as Saturn Girl, who's the telepath.
And a great Sailor Scout.
Yes. I wonder if that joke was made as well.
Knowing me, probably. I've got a small pool.
Yeah, that's right. So it looks like officially the Legion of Superheroes is actually showing up. Not the full Legion, not every single member of the Legion, but
sparsely and gradually.
Members of the actual team, Legion flight rings and things like that, all in hand, look like they're actually coming to Supergirl. So that is coming in the back half of this season. So when they return from like the winter break and do their mid-season premiere, and then to the end of this year, looks like we're going to get some proper Legion of Superheroes.
So how does the Legion of Superheroes differ from the Justice League?
Well, they're in the 31st century.
Oh, yes, that's right. That's right. These are the ones that, are in the...
They're all, from different planets. So their abilities generally are, just inborn traits on their own planets. But then as a team, sort of patrolling the
Similar
galaxy.
to Supergirl.
Yeah, basically, yeah. So then as a team, patrolling the galaxy, they all have different abilities that they can use. But yeah, so that seems to be happening. I'm excited. The Legion kind of half showed up a little bit on Smallville at one point, and it was like,
oh yeah, I already bailed at that point.
I think I had to.
No,
but I think or you got maybe the main 3, like Lightning Lad and Saturn Girl.
You know what's funny is that Smallville had they either continued the way they were from the beginning or had started out the way that they ended, they would have been fine. But moving into where they did at the end wasn't okay for the people who were really into that show, because that show started out as just being like, oh, it's like this high school show, and I get it because he's getting older, it makes it difficult. But for me, what it turned into was just not the way that it's not what I bought into. It's
that problem with North American TV in general, which is instead of just having a story and telling it, and when it's done, it's done. It's how could we keep this going for a few more seasons, right? If they did the British Office or something like that, where they just we know we can get 3 seasons worth of action out of it, and then we'll have to tell a new story or do a new show or something. That might have served that show a bit better, but because wasn't the original idea, it was what did they say? No tights, no flights.
Exactly.
That was the idea.
And what happened in the end? Yeah.
Well, yeah, all of it.
As soon as he started floating,
he started
in his
flying
dream.
In season 4.
Yeah,
when he got that black coat. And he was under the influence of red kryptonite.
Oh yeah, the whole red kryptonite thing really I get why it works in the comic books, but putting that into the show was just ugh.
Yeah. No, I know. I wasn't super into it.
Well, speaking of super, we're going to go over to Facebook where Bianca Erickson asks, who is the most underrated superhero?
Oh, that is a heavy-handed question.
Yeah, most underrated superhero. That's a tough thing to judge because
would you? I think prior to this recent movie, you might say Aquaman.
Well, yeah, that's probably Aquaman. Definitely took the most flack. I think
Affleck.
No,
Ben Affleck.
I get what you're doing. Yeah, I think that's probably fair. Maybe up until relatively recently, but I think people are kind of more aware now of what that character and those stories are actually about. So it's probably not so much Aquaman anymore. Underrated. The Hawks are kind of underrated. Hawkman and Hawkgirl, partly because they don't show up all that often anymore, and their histories are super confusing. But for a long time, they were mainstay characters. They were members of the Justice League all the time. You just see them in every story. So they're maybe a little underrated. Yeah, that's kind of tough. I think outside of people that really like know the material, some of the other Robins, like where they ended up, like everyone knows Dick Grayson or they're familiar with Nightwing, but like less familiar with Red Hood or Red Robin. And I think those two have become really cool characters in their own right, especially Red Robin, Tim Drake. People who like Tim Drake will like fight you to the death online about him because that's how they are.
The internet, really?
But he's a really fascinating character. He might, he's got all of the detective skills that Bruce has, which is something that the other Robins don't really have. So there's something kind of interesting in someone who isn't as like emotionally broken being just as capable. So maybe I might say Tim Drake's a little underrated. I'm sure there's like a million. Everyone's got like a favorite character, and if your character isn't one in the limelight, you feel like your character is underrated.
If your name's Chad Bokelman,
I bet you that there's like a non-human member of the Green Lantern Corps that Chad would love to see more stories of, right? So, it could be like Aricia, could be, well, I mentioned Ba'ax. He's just like the rectangular prism. That's a Green Lantern.
That's amazing. It seems like a Rick and Morty episode.
Or Green Man, or like maybe one of those. Like, I'm sure he's got one. Or I'm Kubrick Rick.
And if you're Colin, you might say,
yeah.
What?
Who do you think is like an underrated character?
I feel like there's one that should be glaring, obviously.
Well,
too.
yeah, Ragman.
Yeah.
Attaboy.
I like Ragman.
You more than like Ragman. You're actually vocal about Ragman.
But here's the thing with him. I don't think that he's an underrated superhero. I think that he is a superhero, plain and simple.
Sure.
Probably underappreciated, maybe, or underused, or underexposed. But
okay.
Underrated.
So sorry. So what's the difference to you then? Like, what would make him underrated, or what's a character that is underrated if you don't see him as that?
I don't think that he's underrated because if you look at his powers,
right,
what he does with them on that like continuity line,
right,
it all adds up to him being a superhero, right? Whereas I think like obviously her question is like personally underrated, whereas like I'm looking at more of like an underrated superhero to me would be more of like a sidekick.
So what you're saying is Ragman to you isn't necessarily someone who deserves like more stories or
no, but
or
the stories
like
that he does have, they're really well developed.
You think
really
in context he's treated appropriately,
yes.
right?
Yes.
Okay, I'll take that. That's
and
fair.
it's kind of cool because they don't take it too far with him.
Right.
They're not like making him do things that are unrealistic.
There is something to be said about your character maybe showing up a little less, because it's always better to want more than to be like, oh my god, and like this is where we've come with this character.
Superman's lifting a building again. Way to go, Supes! You did it again. Like no one's stoked on it anymore.
Richard, do you have one?
For me, so many of the ones that I've thought of really aren't in the actual comic book universe, and I think it's more to do with my lack of knowledge in some of the cases. Like for me, like Supergirl, I never really saw a lot of the comic books, and a lot of the ones that were available felt really geared towards women. And I feel like I would love to see like a grittier Supergirl or like something like that.
You actually might like the New 52 run, because she has like she's dealing a lot with like not understanding her place, because when they leave Krypton, she's older than Cal.
Yes.
She shows up, he's an adult, so she doesn't know her place. She's kind of almost like his sidekick, and that rage builds up to the point that she gets a Red Lantern ring.
Really?
Yeah, you might actually dig that run.
So that's something I'd be definitely interested in. And another one for me was I remember watching the Justice League animated series, and Martian Manhunter really felt like an underdeveloped character in some ways. And when you really start like getting into the comics and stuff, he's clearly well developed. I think it's really just in those animated series, people don't really know what to do with him.
Yeah.
And so now I feel like he's definitely well represented in the comics. I just would love to see more on TV and things like that, because even in like Supergirl show, I feel like they could be doing more with him, but I think he's a scary character to use, and so people kind of lean away sometimes.
Yeah. Well, and in the Rebirth era, we basically haven't really seen Martian Manhunter.
No, and that's true. That's completely true, and I feel like that's such an interesting character, and I would love to see like like a cool. I mean, we keep going back to this with Batman and stuff too, but I would love to see that like a detective-y film noir kind of vibe. I think you can do that with these sort of detective characters, and I feel like it's a road that's not traveled enough.
Yeah, totally.
Hence the reason why my favorite comic books are the ones that they are. But
yeah, that's true.
I think that's something I would love to see more.
Yeah, sure.
So Brenda Polatsky-Vanier asks, when you read a comic...
dis?
New phone, who dis?
I've been saying old phone, who dis lately.
Nice. Just really throw people off.
Yeah. Anyways, Brenda asks, when you read a comic or an arc, what differentiates a good one from a bad one? How does language, art, and composition make a comic book better and or worse? Nope, just or worse. Is there any example of a perfectly written book or story in your mind?
Ooh.
That's a heavy question. Well, they found us.
Yeah. And apparently they're not doing so well.
No, they passed. What differentiates a good one from a bad one? Often I think the dividing line is like the potential, right? Like, so when you start a story, it's all about like, what's the conceit of the story? So is just as an example, it's like a future version of you comes back and has to stop you from saving the day because it leads to something worse down the line. That's an interesting concept. And then as you're going through the arc, you have to see, like, is it just so that you can see, like, the character fight themselves? Or is there, like, an actual, like, something psychological going on that they have to deal with? Or, like, are they actually, like, confronted with a hard choice or the nature of heroism? So that's the potential line, right? If it's just used so we can see, like, we gotta see, like, old Green Lantern fight young Green Lantern, then like that's wasted potential, and that to me then that would be like a poor arc that you're missing an opportunity there. So part of it is about like fulfilling the potential of like whatever your conceit is, and then obviously there's just like it comes down to taste, especially with art. But there's just sometimes the art gets very cartoony, and I turn off a little bit at that. I don't love that. I tend to like art that looks a little more like painting. So I really like Juan Ferreira, and I like Jay Lee, and I like Alex Ross. These are all artists that have a very... It feels almost... I hesitate to use the word classical, but it feels like they come from like this real sort of like formal kind of art training. That's not to say that's the only stuff I enjoy or that I can't enjoy things that aren't them. But when I'm like really struck by artwork in a book, it's usually because of some sort of element like that. Like it looks like an oil painting, or it's really like dynamic with movement. Like Juan Ferreira's art is very like, can look very like scratchy. Same with Ben Templeton, who worked on Gotham by Midnight. It's got this very sort of like frenetic, it's like visceral. The art like can amp you up as much as the story can. I mean, you always talk about the art, Colin, when we give you something to read. Well, yeah, like what is it about, one thing versus the other? Like, what do you like in comic art?
The thing that I like in comic art is when it doesn't do the same block style over and over again, where you're just reading from left to right. Sorry.
Right. So like the panels are
really cool. Right. I like that. And yeah, obviously there has to be like a striking appeal to the artwork for me to be giving a shit about the story.
Yeah.
And a lot of the time I find that a story that is told really well visually says less with words. And I think we've gone over this before, where it's like it fills in the blanks for you without seeing the words, which I find really quite fascinating.
We kind of talked about that a bit with Long Halloween. I mean, Long Halloween gets wordy near the end, but there's huge stretches of it that are like really leaning heavily on the art. Yeah.
Gotta love those too.
Well, yeah, Jeff Loeb, Tim Sale, those are your boys.
Ooh.
Is there an example of a perfectly written book or story in my mind? Certainly not perfect. But I'll give you an example of one that I think is really beautiful and incredible. It's a single issue. It's Superman Annual 11. It's the story is called For the Man Who Has Everything, and basically Batman, Robin, Jason Todd, and Wonder Woman show up at the Fortress of Solitude for Superman's birthday to give him gifts, and they find that he's been like attacked by this plant called the Black Mercy, and in Superman's head, it's like feeding him a mental image of all he ever wanted. He has a family. He lives on Krypton, and Mongol is the villain that's doing this to them. And as Mongol is beating the crap out of Batman and Wonder Woman, Superman has to basically force himself to let go of everything he ever wanted to escape this plant and save the day. And there's like an amazing panel where he's fighting Mongol, and Mongol says, like, for a moment there, I thought you were really going to kill me. And he's got his like hand over Superman's face, and Superman just like looks at him and just says, burn, and like, like heat visions him. Cause he just like lost his planet and his family. Like to him, that was real. And so it's like that's Alan Moore wrote that one. It's a really like beautiful, amazing story. Very well adapted in the cartoon as well.
It'd be really neat if Superman got to stay on Krypton, that whole thing didn't go, and he did become a dad and all this.
What was this, the idea that we were talking about before, where his parents were just like shaking a box like, oh, you're going to space, buddy?
No, I was thinking actually a little bit further that he would be like the coach of his kids' like hockey team or something.
Right.
And they're like
space hockey.
The Krypton Tykes.
The Krypton Tykes. I like that.
Yeah.
That's cute.
That's cute. Or Krypton Tots.
No.
For me, one of the things that always kind of as a thorn in my paw is I want single issues to work as single stories, and I find sometimes they feel completely disconnected.
Yeah.
I love trades, and I'll definitely always buy those. Probably unless it's like I'm gonna buy the Earth One.
Well, that's a trade though.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah. But like a single issue for me, like. It's rare that I'll end up buying them. It's like television. Usually, like I prefer to just watch the whole season all at once. Yeah. That's why Netflix is great. But that's definitely always been a huge issue of mine.
Right. Yeah. No, I think that's fair. I mean, we're kind of in the era of the arc. Like that's for the business.
Era.
That's what it has to do. But yeah,
I'm
with you. Era.
So we're gonna jump over to Twitter. Kyle Clark asks, should DC revive Maxwell Lord, or maybe they have? And I just missed it.
They have, and you just missed it.
Yeah, Kyle, what's wrong with you, stupid?
Next question. No. Maxwell Lord was like the administrator of the Justice League during the like Justice League International.
Is this before
era.
or after Todd?
Whoa, administration.
Well, I mean, you laugh, but it's actually kind of sinister. He basically like deliberately makes the Justice League kind of ineffectual.
Like Super Todd.
No, I actually streamline everything. Remember, I do fold the folders.
You fold the documents, put them in the folders, and then fold them again. It's impossible to get anything out.
It's called folders. They need to be
and
folded.
Then you binder clip them shut. So like it's like a 6-step process to get anything.
I'm sorry.
And then he waxes them into the flooring.
Should the Justice League not be concerned with security?
Well, yeah, the binder clip will definitely stop Luthor.
It's fine. The Avengers wanted to be anyways.
Well, yeah, they can have you. So Maxwell Lord was this.
Goodbye!
He was this administrator that was sort of making the Justice League ineffectual, but he had this latent, like psionic power. He could like mind control people, but it would like make his nose bleed. Like it was an effort for him. He's the one that was behind that whole OMAC thing that I talked about, where he wanted to like destroy like all the metahumans.
Yeah.
He's the one that killed Blue Beetle, shot him in the head. Wonder Woman then snapped his neck. And then he was brought back at the end of Blackest Night, that zombie Green Lantern story. He was resurrected by the White Lanterns. And so he was around for a little bit through like Brightest Day and that. And then in the New 52, Maxwell Lord does exist. He just went up against the Suicide Squad like last year or earlier this year. He had like freed these sort of 5 dangerous villains from prison, and they went after the Suicide Squad.
So
what's Justice League.
What's this guy's whole deal?
He basically like, even though he has a power, he doesn't trust or like metahumans or superhumans. He wants to be in control. He like mind controlled. It's why Wonder Woman had to snap his neck, 'cause he was mind controlling Superman and like going after people. And she had the lasso tied around him and said, "How do I stop you?" And he said, "You can't." So she killed him.
Whoa.
Yeah. So Maxwell Lord is around. We haven't seen too much of him lately, but he does exist. He's back.
All right.
Dr. DC will be back after a quick break.
Dr. DC will be right back.
I was just thinking that too, yeah.
This episode of the Dr. DC podcast is brought to you thanks to our sponsor, Great Lakes Grooming Company. They sent us some products to try, and they are awesome. My personal favorites are the pine tar soap. Gives me my classic Colin Close smell. Super minty, super fresh, and it's great to use either in the shower or just to wash your face with. And I also tried their lip balm, which helps keep my lips looking pretty sweet. Great Lakes Grooming is meant to be easy and ready to use, rain or shine. All their products are purposely designed and environmentally responsible. They're handmade in Ontario, Canada, and ready for adventure wherever one may find themselves. And for you lucky listeners, you can get 10% off on Great Lakes Grooming's regular price products by going to www.greatlakesgrooming.com and using the promo code DrDCPodcast. That's www.greatlakesgrooming.com, and the promo code is DRDCPodcast. And now on to the show.
All right, we're back.
Yay!
Nailed it.
Oh yeah, it's my turn.
Yeah.
Coming in on email.
Going to the emails. Chad Bokelman.
A bogle, bogle, bogle.
Drink.
Is Hal Jordan responsible for his actions as Parallax?
Yeah, Chad and I have talked about this a little bit. Basically, that whole thing where Hal Jordan succumbs to Parallax, he's infected with fear, and then eventually is possessed by Parallax and becomes a supervillain. But in Chad's point is that in the lead up, he's not being physically possessed by Parallax. He's just being influenced. But that's when he goes on his rampage and destroys the Green Lantern Corps and supposedly kills Sinestro and the Guardians and Kilowog and all these other people. And so Chad's point is that if he's only being influenced, if he's not being full possessed, then like that was actually Hal doing those things. You can't just fully blame Parallax. And in a way, I don't disagree. But you know, when they did the what's it called, Green Lantern Rebirth, and they were like, Parallax possessed him. That's what happened. That was like the retcon to sort of redeem him a bit. You can't redeem a character and say, but he was totally responsible for all those murders. Like, that's a difficult row to hoe. So I would say
Hitler did a lot of great things for the people of Germany.
Yikes. I was about to say made the trains run on time, but that's Mussolini.
Mm-hmm.
At any rate, yeah. So like, it's hard to say that he did. Like, it's hard to redeem him and say that. So I think what it is, you have to imagine that whether or not he's being full physically possessed by Parallax, which he wasn't at the time, that influence has to have been strong enough to override his judgment. That's the only way to make him really redeemable. If it's just like it can't be the level of like influence where it's like, you know, you want a snack. Like, it has to be more than that. Like, he can't have just been this close to snapping and killing all of his comrades. And then you just be like, but I was hungry. Or like, I just got pushed a little over the edge. It has to be like,
You need a Snickers.
Yeah.
There has to be.
That'd be a great commercial. DC execs, we know you're always listening.
There are Snickers ads in comic books. They could do it. It would be really weird and dark. So yeah, I mean, Chad, I don't disagree with that premise, but I do think that they're trying to imply that even the level of influence of Parallax, when he sort of reaches through the ring and, you know, causes gray hair and gets in there when Coast City is destroyed.
Way up in there.
I think that has to be stronger than just like a nudge. Otherwise, that whole redemption doesn't work like as a story.
Cool.
So no, he's not responsible.
Okay. So he's not responsible?
I don't think so. I think he feels the guilt and he feels responsible, and that's interesting for the character, but I don't think he actually is responsible.
So we're going to go to Reddit, where all things are pleasant and nobody's awful.
That's actually their slogan. It's funny that you know that.
Is it really?
It's very wordy.
Oh, I'm like, that's a great slogan. Reddit, we know you're always listening. Oh, God. Kind of a drug expert.
I love this.
That's the name?
Yeah.
I love that.
Cool. Cool. What are the best lesser-known storylines? What are the best issues storylines for a newbie DC reader to start with? Well, put down the drugs and pick up the hugs. That's step one.
You preaching to yourself or to this guy?
But yes.
Best lesser known storylines. Well, I quickly mentioned Death of a Prince earlier, and that's an Aquaman storyline that ran through Adventure Comics in like the.
I think we had to read that book in high school.
Death of a Salesman.
Yeah.
It's about this guy who's like down on his luck.
Yeah.
He was a prince. And
He used to be able to
now
drive
he's
to
a salesman.
Yonkers for a nickel. I would definitely mention that one. Another Aquaman one, since those are easy for me to think of, is Aquaman Time and Tide, which was a 4-issue miniseries that led into that Peter David, like, iconic 90s run. That's a really cool one. More modern, there's a storyline called the Ranthanagar War.
Ranthanagar.
So it's a war between these two different planets. It involves Adam Strange and Hawkman and Hawkgirl.
Oh, yes, you did talk about this one before.
Ranthanagar War is an interesting one. That was part of the lead up to Infinite Crisis. Another one of those is called Day of Vengeance. I've definitely talked about that. It's where the Spectre goes nuts and tries to destroy all magic, and the Shadow Pact, including Ragman, comes together to fight him. That's a really neat one. I can't remember, but the one that I want to give as like my main answer, I can't remember the name of the story, but there's a story arc, I think through the 70s or into the 80s, where Hugo Strange deducts the secret identity of Batman and tries to become Batman. Like,
Whoa.
He's so obsessed that there's like a panel where he like puts on the costume and he's like, I feel like like I know why he does this. Like, this feels great. He's like really getting into like Batman's head.
He becomes kind of a drug expert too, I guess.
You know what? You actually can make that argument. I think that's pretty apt. Yeah. I unfortunately can't remember what that story is called, but that Hugo Strange arc is very interesting, of him being so obsessed with Batman, figuring out who he is like via psych profile and that sort of thing. And yeah, I would definitely give that one a read. If you're like totally new to DC, what to start with? Well, Colin started with Ragman. That seems to have taken.
Yeah, but you know what? Like, I think I would never, not never. I would rarely suggest that as an opener for somebody.
Yes, no, I'm with you.
Because like obviously I saw like the Dark Knight or whatever it was with Heath Ledger.
Yep.
Like I've seen some DC stuff. But in terms of the comic book side of it, like I think a good place to start is probably just with modern day film. Like go back 10 years, watch some of the movies. If you're genuinely like, if you've never, ever seen any DC stuff at all, start there. See if there's anything in there that you're like, oh, I kind of like the storyline.
Do you know what? I actually think that's like good advice. I would throw the like Justice League cartoon in there as well. Yeah. You know, but if you watch those things and you're like, I kind of dig that character. I mean, like watching something, a lot of those are very like faithfully adapted anyway, so you'll be getting like a good version of the character. But then if something in there clicks for you, then you at least know where to start with a book, because there's so much stuff.
I think also a lot of the animated series stuff is another good next step.
Totally.
Especially the Batman Year One.
Oh, yeah.
That was that's kind of like really encapsulates sort of who Batman is and that sort of vibe. And then I mean, depending a lot, there's a lot of comic books that just kind of like look back on that hero's histories. Yeah. That kind of stuff is really good. Superman for All Seasons, I will always say that one's a great first comic book. That was one of my first like sort of forays as an adult into comic books again.
Killing Joke was incredible.
Yep, Killing Joke is really, really good, both the movie and the comic book.
Yeah, I was going to say the adaptation to animated film.
Is there any other comic books where they kind of they look back on their history and you can kind of get a vibe of who they are?
Well, the thing that made me think of, and this is a little bit bad advice, but in a way, it might be interesting to start with one of those like big event books. You know, the ones that like bring all of the characters in, or they bring in, you know, and you get an idea of their history through these things.
They generally have to, sort of, because people who are reading it aren't necessarily a fan of all the other comic books, so they do have to connect.
And it might be one of those things where it's a little bewildering as you read it, but you'll see so many characters and you'll get so many glimpses of things that, like if you were watching the cartoons, it might give you an idea of the types of things that you're into, or who you might want to read more of next. So in a way, I might even say things like Infinite Crisis or what's another good, maybe like 0 Hour even, or something like that. Like that might be an interesting way to try to start. Or Convergence is a neat one, because Convergence was a series that like basically pit different like Elseworlds and like eras of DC against each other. There was like pre-crisis versions of things and post-Flashpoint, and so like maybe something like that. It would probably be confusing on first read, but yeah, give it a go, see if something sticks.
Okay.
We did it. Number two.
So if you want to ask us some more questions like the ones that we've read today, you can go to our social media and check out us on Facebook at
Dr. DC Podcast.
You can go to Instagram.
Dr. DC Podcast.
Well, that's right. You can go to our website.
drdcpodcast.com or .ca.
Where else can they go, Colin?
Oh, you can check out the email.
Oh, what's that?
drdcpodcast@gmail.com.
And don't forget to rate, review, and 5-star, and
Subscribe.
and all that stuff on the Google Play and
iTunes.
Google Play and iTunes, yeah.
And I don't think we're on Spotify yet, but we're trying.
That's definitely the next step. I just found out that they were doing podcasts, so that's the
Oh,
next
really?
step for sure.
I don't even think I knew that.
Yeah. They just started doing it.
I was kidding.
No, they just started doing it,
Cool.
actually. So,
And don't forget our Twitter, @DrDC.
oh, that's right. See, we missed one.
I didn't. You did.
Okay.
Two drinks in. It's getting
Well,
sloppy, folks.
the
Some
thing.
kind of sign off.
Adios.
When there's trouble, you call DW.